he knew. That is the part that nobody talks about. Jesus already knew that Lazarus was dead. He knew before anyone told him. He knew when he chose to stay 2 more days instead of rushing to Bethany. He knew the stone would be rolled away. He knew what he was about to do. And yet, when he arrived at the tomb, he wept. Not a tear, not a quiet moment of reflection. He wept. And for 2,000 years, people have been asking the same question. Why? If you already know the ending, why cry over the beginning? If you are about to reverse death itself, why break down in front of a grave? It makes no sense. Unless, and this is what most people never consider, unless the miracle was never the point, unless the tears were. My name is not important. What matters is what we are about to find. Because the answer to this question is buried in a word. A single Greek word that was written 2,000 years ago and has been misread ever since. It is buried in a tomb carved into limestone that still exists today, in a village whose name is literally derived from the man who died inside it. And it is buried in a theological truth so uncomfortable, so raw, that most churches skip right past it. Today, we go there. We go to the tomb. We go to the word. And we go to the moment. Because what happened outside that cave in Bethany was not just a miracle. It was God, if you believe he was God, doing something that no one expected. He stopped. He looked at the people crying around him, and he joined them. To understand what happened that day, you need to understand who Lazarus was. He was not a follower in the crowd. He was not one of the 12 disciples. He was a close personal friend of Jesus. The text in John chapter 11 uses a specific word to describe the relationship, the Greek word phileo, not agapao, which is the broader theological love, phileo, the love between friends, the love of genuine personal affection. Jesus loved Lazarus the way you love someone you know. And Lazarus lived in Bethany, a small village less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, on the eastern slope of the Mount of Olives. He lived there with his 2 sisters, Mary and Martha. This was not a random house. Every time Jesus came to Jerusalem, he stayed in Bethany. This was his home base, his refuge, the place where he rested between the chaos of the city and the weight of what he knew was coming. Now here is something most people miss entirely. When the message came that Lazarus was sick, Jesus was not nearby. He was across the Jordan River, far from Judea, because the religious authorities in Jerusalem had already tried to stone him. Going back was not a casual trip. It was walking into a death trap. His disciples knew it. When Jesus announced they were going back to Judea, Thomas, yes, the same Thomas who would later doubt the resurrection, said something remarkable. He said, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." That is not dramatic flair. That is a man who genuinely believed this trip would get them all killed. Jesus went anyway. And he waited 2 more days before going. Not because he did not care, not because he was testing anyone's faith as some interpretations suggest. The text is more subtle than that. He waited because what he was about to do required the moment to be undeniable. Here is why. In first-century Jewish belief, the soul of a dead person lingered near the body for 3 days. After 3 days, the soul was considered fully departed. Lazarus had been dead for 4 days when Jesus arrived. 4 days. In that culture, that was not a coma. That was not unconsciousness. That was not a misdiagnosis. That was the other side. That was completely, irreversibly, officially dead. Jesus did not arrive early enough to create ambiguity. He arrived late enough to eliminate it. But that is only the first layer. Let us go to Bethany, not in theory, in archaeology. The village of Bethany from the Gospel of John still exists today. It is now called Al-Eizariya, a Palestinian town on the West Bank, about a mile and a half east of Jerusalem. The name Al-Eizariya is the Arabic transliteration of Lazarus, which is itself derived from the name Lazarus. The village has carried his name for 2,000 years, and the tomb is still there. Carved into the limestone bedrock, accessible today through a staircase of 24 steps cut into the rock. The original entrance would have been sealed with a large rolling stone, a golal in Hebrew, which was standard burial practice for wealthy families in 1st century Judea. The tomb itself is a small chamber, rough-hewn, no ornamentation, dark. The air inside still carries the weight of the stone around it. Archaeologists and historians have debated for centuries whether this is the precise location described in John chapter 11. But the antiquity of the site is not disputed. A church was built over it in the 4th century. Then a mosque was built adjacent to it in the 14th century. The continuous veneration of this specific location across 2 different religions across 17 centuries tells us something important. This was considered the real place for a very long time by people who were a lot closer to the original event than we are. Now let us talk about what burial meant in that world. In 1st century Judea, death was not a private affair. It was a community event. When someone died, the community gathered immediately. Professional mourners were hired, women who would wail loudly, tear their garments, and beat their chests in a stylized, formal expression of grief. This was not performance in the modern sense. It was ritual. It was the culture's way of marking the weight of death, of honoring the person who had passed, of holding the family together in their worst moment. By the time Jesus arrived in Bethany, Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. That means the house was already full of mourners. The wailing had been going on for 4 days. Martha came running out to meet Jesus before he reached the village. Then Mary fell at his feet weeping, and around her, the crowd wept with her. Jesus walked into the middle of a grief that had been building for 4 days. The body of Lazarus was wrapped in linen strips, the standard Jewish burial preparation, similar to what we would later see described at the resurrection of Jesus himself. The wrappings included spices packed between the strips to slow decomposition and mask the smell. The tomb would have been sealed with the stone from day 1. When Jesus finally asks where they have laid him, and they say, "Come and see," he is not asking because he does not know. He is walking toward the tomb deliberately, surrounded by 4 days of accumulated grief, in a village that smells of death, watching people he cared about crying in the dirt. And here is where it gets extraordinary. Before he does anything miraculous, before he commands the stone to be moved, before he speaks a word to the dead, the text stops. 2 words in the original Greek. 2 of the most studied, most debated, most important words in the entire New Testament. Edakrysen ho Jesus. Jesus wept. Here is what you were never told in Sunday school. The Greek word used in John 11:35 is Edakrysen. It comes from the root dakrio, which refers specifically to silent, quiet tears, individual drops, the kind of crying you do when you are trying not to cry, not a breakdown, not a wail, a contained, internal, profound grief that spills out in spite of itself. This is important because the same passage uses a completely different word to describe how Mary and the mourners around her were crying. That word is klio. It means audible, expressive weeping, the kind of grief that fills a room, the kind that first-century Jewish mourning culture both expected and required. Jesus did not klio, he Edakrysen. He did not join the performance of grief. He was not doing what everyone around him was doing. He was doing something quieter, something more private, something that the text seems almost reluctant to describe because it gets only 2 words, the shortest verse in the Bible, and then moves on. Why does that matter? Because it means what he felt was not cultural obligation. It was not the expected response of a religious leader arriving at a house of mourning. It was not theater. It was real. It was personal. It was his own grief, not borrowed from the crowd around him. Now watch how the crowd reacts. They do not say, "Look how powerful he is." They do not say, "A miracle is coming." They say, and this is the Greek, "Ide pos ephile auton." See how he loved him. They recognize the tears as love, not as weakness, not as despair, as love. And then, immediately after, some of them say something that cuts right to the heart of the question we started with. They say, "Could not this man, who opened the eyes of the blind, have kept this man from dying?" In other words, if you loved him so much, where were you? That question has never stopped being asked.
Here is what the text does not do, and this is crucial. It does not tell us exactly why Jesus wept. It does not give us a theological explanation in that moment. It gives us the tears, the crowd's reaction, and then Jesus arriving at the tomb, deeply moved, troubled within himself, as the text puts it. The Greek there is embrimaomai, a word that carries overtones of anger, of deep emotional disturbance. Some scholars translate it as groaning in his spirit, as if something inside him was resisting what he was seeing. But resisting what? He knew the ending. He was about to undo it. This is the question that cracked open the early church's understanding of who Jesus was. And there are really only 2 serious answers. The first, he wept because he genuinely felt the pain of the people around him. Even knowing what he was about to do, the sight of Mary's grief, the sound of the mourning, the weight of what death does to the people left behind, it broke through. Not because he forgot the plan, but because he was fully inside the human experience of loss in real time. God, in human form, standing in front of a tomb, feeling what it is like to lose someone. The second answer, and these 2 are not mutually exclusive, is darker. Some theologians argue that what troubled Jesus in that moment was not the death of Lazarus. It was death itself. The fact that this was the reality of the world, that tombs existed, that people he loved would end up in them, that the thing he came to ultimately confront was standing right in front of him, made of limestone, sealed with a stone, and smelling of it. Both answers lead to the same place. And this is the part that should stop you cold. If you believe this story, if you believe that Jesus knew he was about to raise Lazarus from the dead, then his tears were not about Lazarus. They were about you. They were about every person standing at a grave who did not get a miracle that day. They were about what death does to people, about the gap between what the world is and what it was supposed to be. He was not crying for Lazarus. Lazarus was about to be fine. He was crying for the fact that any of this was necessary at all.
If this is changing how you read this story, stay with me. Subscribe if you haven't yet, because we go deeper every single week. And what comes next in this video is the part that most people never reach.
Now here is what changes when you understand the tears this way. Most of the time when we talk about the story of Lazarus, we talk about the miracle. We count it among the signs in the Gospel of John, the 7th and most dramatic of them all. We focus on the stone being rolled away, on the smell, on Lazarus walking out of the tomb still wrapped in burial cloth, on the crowd's astonishment. But the miracle was the conclusion. The tears were the revelation. Isaiah chapter 53, written 700 years before this moment, describes the figure at the center of Israel's greatest prophecy as a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. That phrase, acquainted with grief, is not metaphor. It is not poetic distance. The Hebrew word is yada. To know something through direct experience, to be intimate with it, to have lived inside it. The claim being made in that ancient text, and fulfilled, if you accept it, in the one standing outside a tomb in Bethany, is not that God understands grief from a safe distance. It is that God has been inside it. That the divine, whatever that means, chose to become fully acquainted with the worst thing human beings experience. And what makes the Lazarus scene almost unbearable to read carefully is this. Jesus did not have to stop and cry. He could have walked straight to the tomb, called Lazarus out and moved on. The miracle would have been the same. The crowd would still have been astonished. The religious authorities would still have begun plotting against him. But he stopped. He looked at Mary on the ground in front of him. He looked at the mourners wailing around her. He felt it, and he cried.
The Council of Chalcedon in 451 AD spent years hammering out a definition. Jesus was fully divine and fully human, two natures in one person, without confusion or separation. It sounds abstract, but it was built in part around moments like this one, around the fact that the text insisted on real tears, real grief, real acquaintance with loss, and refused to let those be explained away. What the tears say is not that God failed to stop suffering in time. What they say is that God is not watching suffering from the outside. He entered it. He stood in it. He cried in it. And then, only then, he acted. The order matters. He did not solve the problem first and feel bad about it later. He felt it first. He stood in the grief with the people in the grief, and then he moved. That sequence, presence before power, tears before miracle, is either the most human thing ever written about God or the most divine thing ever written about a human, depending on what you believe. Either way, it is extraordinary. Let me bring this back to where we started. Jesus wept. 2 words, the shortest verse in the Bible. And in those 2 words, the entire weight of the story shifts. Because you came here wondering why God would cry over a death he was about to reverse. And now you know that the question itself was the wrong one. The right question is not, why did he cry if he knew the ending? The right question is, what kind of God stops, in the middle of a plan he already controls, to sit in someone else's grief? What kind of God does not skip straight to the miracle? The archaeologists who excavated Bethany did not find a miracle preserved in stone. What they found was a tomb, carved, sealed, undeniable. And the story says that when God stood in front of that evidence, surrounded by 4 days of accumulated mourning, with the knowledge of what he was about to do already in his hands, he did not fast forward. He felt it. And if that is true, if that is what this text is actually claiming, then the next time you are standing in front of your own version of a sealed tomb, whatever that looks like, the message is not, God will fix it. The message is, God already knows what is inside, and he is standing there with you anyway. That is not religion. That is not theology for its own sake. That is the most surprising thing a 2,000-year-old text has ever said. And we are just getting started. If this changed how you read one of the most famous stories in the Bible, there is more. Every week on this channel, we go back to the sources, the archaeology, the original languages, the history that the Sunday school version leaves out. Subscribe if you have not already. It costs you nothing, and it means we can keep going. And next week, we go into the room where it all started, the Last Supper. What Jesus actually said that night. What the original Aramaic reveals that the English translations miss. And why what happened at that table set the course of the next 2,000 years of human history. That episode drops next week. Do not miss it.